Welcome to the Venus video, everyone. It was a bit slow in the making. I had some family stuff come up and ended up out on the west coast for a while. And here in Ottawa, we had a huge storm blow through. It's been a few weeks now, but a lot of people still don't have power. So that was kind of our natural disaster for the year. I guess it's good we got it done in the warm weather instead of during the minus 30 temperatures we like in the winter. So it might take me a minute to get my brain going here, but I do want to do some housekeeping first. We will be reviewing birth charts. If you don't know what a birth chart is or how to check your own birth chart or pull it up, on my website, shadowcraftcult.com, there is the astrology section, and I did an introductory video on how to access your birth chart. So I would start there. I've already done the Mars video on shadow work and Mars through your birth chart. I will have to repeat a little bit here, but if you've already watched that one, you'll know what I'm talking about. And I'm doing Mars and Venus because they are a good balance to each other as far as energies go. But one of the most important things to comment on is the fact that when you hear me describe your Venus, it might not be something that feels accurate to you. And that can occur for a number of reasons. One of them being that you might have another planet interacting through an aspect to the planet I'm talking about, and it can prevent your Venus from acting in such a way that is considered typical for that Venus energy. The only way to fully understand your chart is to have someone do a birth chart reading for you, because they will be able to synthesize all the different elements of your chart for you and give you an understanding of how the different planets and aspects work together to make you who you are and affect how you interact with your environment. So just to give you that heads up, if you feel like some of this stuff doesn't apply to you appropriately, then it might be that there's something else happening. And as well, I do birth chart readings for people if you are interested in getting a more in-depth reading, but there are many wonderful astrologers out there that can help you out in better understanding your chart. So we're just focusing in on one element here, and we're going to look at Venus as it moves through the different signs of the zodiac. So each person is born with their Venus in a different sign. And it's important to know before we head into this that each of the signs has a different mode attached to it and a different element attached to it. And I'd like to quickly review those. So the three modes that each of the zodiacs fall into are either cardinal, fixed, or mutable. If the zodiac sign is falling into the mode of cardinal, it's going to be a very beginning energy or starting energy. This is a sort of instigating motivation that affects the sign. So usually very good at starting things, and that's the main drive for those zodiac signs. For zodiac signs in a fixed mode, they're better at sustaining things and carrying on things that are already happening. So they're the ones who do the follow through, but they're also ones that have difficulty making changes for that reason. And then the last mode is mutable. And with the mutable, it's kind of like having your fingers in all the pies or your feet going in two different directions, in the sense that mutable energy is very adaptable, but it's also a little less focused than other energies. So that's just a quick summary of those. And the elements you already are probably a little bit aware of are the classical air, water, earth, and fire. So with fire, you're going to get a sort of outward moving energy, lots of passion, lots of intensity. It's predominantly a masculine energy, so that gives it that outward drive or ambition. It's a very high energy and fast moving. When a zodiac sign is in air, it's also got that sort of fast pace, high energy, because again, it's another one of the masculine energies, so it's outward moving, but it's more related to thinking and connection. So there's more of a social element in the air element. Then we move down into water. This is a feminine energy, so a connecting energy. And there is more of a feeling aspect to this energy. It's more about in the body, interconnectedness between people, feeling other people's emotions or intuitiveness. And the last one is earth. Earth is also feminine, but less of a interpersonal energy because it's less moving, so more grounded, more based in the real world. more hands-on energy, and there can be a little bit of an inertia to the earth element zodiacs. So as I go through, I will discuss which ones fall into which category and explain how that affects your Venus. And of course, before we start moving through the zodiac signs, we need to discuss what Venus represents in your birth chart. And this one's probably pretty obvious to some people. The most obvious connotation for Venus is love, which is interesting because the word Venus is actually the Latin word for love. But I would like to point out another connotation. The word Venus, it's also closely associated with the word venom. So there's a certain poison element associated with it, which I really thought kind of plays out with the fact that there is a codependent or a negative element to this energy that maybe we're not as focused on sometimes, or maybe we get taken away from. So that's an interesting little past note about Venus. Obviously, in comparison to the Mars energy that we were working with, Mars is the masculine energy in the birth chart. It's not the only masculine energy, but it's one of the more obvious ones. And Venus is the counterpart as the feminine energy. And I think there's lots of words that I will kind of briefly go over that can be interpreted or connected with Venus. But the most important one that I think underlies all of them is the word connection. And when we go back to the masculine and feminine energies, which in our society carry a lot of weight, as in the masculine energy is considered better or considered stronger, and the feminine energy is considered weaker or something that we should feel shame around, I think it's important to take these two symbols or words back to the roots. And as I discussed in the Mars video, masculine energy is mostly just the ambition or drive to separate something apart from itself. So we talked about in the Mars video, the seed shooting its first leaves up from the soil, because Mars is also associated with agriculture. So there's that drive or ambition element, and it's also hierarchical in the sense that it separates things out. And that's all a natural part of a masculine energy. Whereas feminine energy is the connective element that interlinks everything. And in that way, it's very much related to the cyclical nature of things, because in a cyclical nature, all things are interconnected. So if you want to think of masculine energy as the black and white, feminine energy would be the gray. It would be everything in between. Obviously, these two things play well together, and if you start thinking of them in the simplest terms, you'll start to see them in everything, how they work together. But when they work together well, things are in balance. And it's just in our society right now, maybe you're aware, maybe you're not, there's a deep imbalance towards masculine energy, which some people theorize is coming back into balance at this time. But because of that imbalance, you can see a lot of the overambitiousness without any respect towards the interconnectivity. But when we look at our Venus, we start to understand that natural desire to connect people and to connect to the world around us, and just to sit in that connection between things. So it's a good way to balance ourselves out, to become aware of this energy and see how it functions in our chart. As well, I should just bring up the obvious connotations. Venus dates back to the relation to the god Venus. It relates back to the goddess Venus, who is also a version of Aphrodite in the Greek mythology. And so as well as that love or attraction mythology of Venus, there's also elements of beauty, art, harmony. An interesting association with Venus is flowers, and I find that really cohesive with the Mars symbology of the plant bursting forth, that sort of spear energy of coming forth, and then the Venus energy being the blooming or the settling into the place and connecting in a beautiful way. is kind of how that energy works. So it's more passive in the sense that it's not trying to achieve something, but it is creating an experience in the world that helps us come together. So just some general ideas about how Venus works in the chart. And we will dig into each of the signs to better understand it individually. We start with Venus in Aries, which is probably one of the most difficult places for Venus to be. Aries is a fire sign, it's cardinal, and it's the natural home for Mars, which is Venus's counterpart. What often happens with the desire to connect with people with that Venus energy is it can kind of get overridden by the Mars energy or that fieriness, and it can prevent Venus from maybe connecting with people as much as she would like to. So some challenges people with a Venus in Aries experience is that they have a hard time connecting with the emotional part of people. They're much better at expressing their own experience and aspirations, and maybe have more difficulty connecting back and forth, like allowing the emotions to flow between both people. Some of the positives are that this can make people very driven to connect with other people, and they really love sharing their passion with other people. So they're going to benefit from a relationship where the other person and themselves have similar motivations and are both similarly very ambitious to achieve things. So they're not going to spend time with people who are lazy or don't really want to accomplish anything with their lives, because passion is part of their way of life. In some ways, this assertiveness can become a problem in the sense that they need to feel like they're winning in a relationship, and it can lead to a certain level of antagonism. Sometimes people with a Venus in Aries can be a little prone to fighting because they enjoy that energy. From the artistic angle, people with Venus in Aries are going to enjoy physically expressive demonstrations. They're going to enjoy watching things like sports or dance, or something that requires a lot of energy is going to be a way that Aries Venus really works out that artistic expression, whether they're working it out or they're observing it in other people. They enjoy a physical nature to artistic expression. Because this is a fire sign, there's a certain element of perfectionism and also a level of idealization. People with Aries Venus can sometimes come into a relationship with a certain sense of illusion about what is actually happening, and then after a few months realize that the person they're interested in or the relationships that they're making are not everything they dream them to be, and that can be discouraging. But it can lead to a sort of start-stop situation in most relationships where they're quick to burn out. So it's really important for these people to find relationships where they feel stimulated and interested. Dynamic people are going to have the longest appeal to the Venus Aries. There's just a definite need for motion in these relationships. Some shadow work that really benefits people with these Venus Aries is going to be experiencing emotions on a deeper level, so moving into the body and truly experiencing them, because that'll allow them to connect with other people and realize what other people's emotions actually are. The fieriness of the sign can often cut us off from that experience, so moving towards that will provide us with some insights and some deeper intuition into other people. As well, working with fears is really important with anything that's a Mars-y dominated sign, because underlying the aggression or that natural drive is generally a fear. So if you start to become aware of your fears and what drives you, it'll allow you to have more altruistic motives that aren't motivated by this need to get away from something or avoid something. For our birth chart, we are looking at Helena Bonham Carter, probably for the younger generation, known from Harry Potter. I personally remember her from Fight Club, one of my favorites. She has a really interesting chart. There's no birth time, so we can't do houses on this chart, which we would usually do. So when you have a birth time, you can tell which sign is in which house, which can help you figure out what the chart means. With a chart without a birth time, we just look at the planets and how they interact with each other. We sometimes lose out on information because of that, but it does still provide us with enough that we can read what's here. With Helena, she has her Venus in Aries. It's interesting with her because she was with Tim Burton for, I think, 13 years. But you can see how that independence came out in their relationship because they didn't share a house together, because they stated they both like to have their things their way, which is very much the aesthetic of Aries Venus, where they like to have their own way of doing things and their own individuality at all times. So that really played out into that relationship with her. As well, she has Mercury in conjunction with the Sun in Gemini. In interviews, she talks about how her favorite part of acting is investigating the roles that she's playing. So she often does a very deep dive into the characters that she's playing, especially if they're real people. And she will do a lot of investigation and really likes to collect that knowledge, which is common with that Mercury and Gemini energy, which is sort of attracted to getting bits of everything everywhere and being very well read on all topics. She said that in an interview before, that she really enjoys to have all the bits and pieces of these characters she's playing to get a deeper insight into them, which speaks to that Mercury, Sun, and Gemini. When we get to Venus and Taurus, we're now moving into a fixed sign and an earth sign as well. The physical attributes for a Taurus Venus are very important. They're very grounded in their five senses. They tend to like luxury or high quality items. This sign is pretty easy to pick out visually because they're usually very good at dressing themselves and designing their environment, because the visual experience is very important to them. Venus is at its own home when it's in Taurus. That's where it kind of belongs, so it has an easy time expressing itself. And some of the priorities that it has are around having comfort, pleasure, beauty, and harmony surrounding it. But because it has this fixed energy, it's also very stubborn and difficult to turn around or change the mind of. So for people with placements in this sign, they tend to have a hard time letting go of relationships. And once they're in a relationship, they tend to want to keep doing the same thing over and over again. And sometimes that can limit them if there's changes that need to be made or personal evolutions that are required. For these people, because of that heavy earth energy with that fixed energy, they like to do things slowly and well. They don't have as much interest in rushing along and quickly completing things like you would with an Aries sign. Some other interesting facts about Venus in Taurus is that Taurus rules the throat, and when you put Venus in there, which is usually a benefic planet or a beneficial planet, this will add the attribute of people with a Venus Taurus having usually nice voices or good singing voices. It's pretty common. As well, it's important to know that people in these relationships really, because they enjoy the physical body so much, like to show their affection through physical touch. That's just the cornerstone of their sign. Because of the heavy groundedness and the deep attachment to material things with this sign, shadow work for them would be something like going through your possessions and clearing out what you don't really need. So making changes around your life and home will help you clear out some of that stagnant, heavy energy that you might not even notice, but could be preventing you from making the changes that you need to change. So it's important for people with this placement to go through things on a regular enough basis so they don't get too stuck. As well, looking at any fears that you carry around change would be a good shadow work practice. So journaling about what you're afraid of losing if something is different than what you expect, or looking at or experiencing the emotions on a deeper level so that they can process through. So moving into the body when you're feeling that anxiety around change, or even around hurry or energy that just feels too high. If you start to feel the emotions in the body, it'll help balance you out and process that properly. For our birth chart, we are looking at Michael J. Fox, who is sort of a Canadian treasure, a long-time well-known actor. I think most people know him from maybe Back to the Future, but obviously he did lots of other things in his career. And he is a Venus Taurus, as you can see on the chart. And I think it's pretty interesting. He's been married for a very long time. And just speaking about the luxury of things, a quote I found of his that I thought really played into it was, here, I'll just read. I owned a Ferrari, a Range Rover, a Mercedes 560 SL convertible, a Jeep, a Cherokee, a Nissan 300 ZX, I can't remember the intricate decision tree I had to climb in order to determine which one to drive to work on any given day. It probably had something to do with the weather, or which car had more gas in the tank, or upholstery that best matched whatever shirt I happened to throw on that morning. So it's interesting because it does talk about, obviously at some point he enjoyed having all these luxurious cars, and also the fashion sense, which is common with Taurus, where he actually at some point was considering what he was wearing compared to what car would match it best. I love that. An interesting bit of his chart here, I don't know for people who know, but he was diagnosed with Parkinson's at a very young age, actually at his first Saturn return. And you can see there he has Saturn in his 12th house, which is one of the most difficult houses in astrology. It's usually the house of things that are bigger than you. And Saturn is also the ruler of his first house, his rising sign there. And the first house represents your body, your health, your outlook on life. So it's interesting that when his Saturn returned to right over that same point, which it does every 30 years for every person, it impacted how his health was, and it became something bigger than himself. So not to go deeply into diagnoses and astrology charts, because obviously everyone who has a Saturn in the 12th house is not going to experience this, but it's just interesting to see how that timing played out for him. When we get to Venus in Gemini, we are into a mutable sign and an air sign. So the mutable signs are the ones that are kind of all over the place. They're very adaptable, but they can kind of be many things at once. As well, the air signs are very mentally focused. So with this sign, you're going to have a hard time even interacting with feelings, because Gemini Venus is often caught up in their head and have more difficulty getting into their body where the feelings and emotions exist. What attracts people into relationships with this sign is going to be intellectual stimulation. They have really good social skills, and they're very good at verbally expressing themselves, to the point that they often have lots of friends that are kind of light friends, because they'll be friends with many people, but when it comes to deeper emotional connections, it's more challenging for them. They sometimes will start friendships and end them off very quickly, but it doesn't matter who they're around, because they're going to have an easy time connecting with them on a mental scale. As well, because they have this energy that's kind of all over the place, they really like to be mentally stimulated all the time. They can get bored easily. So sometimes that's what limits them in relationships, is they just hit that wall where they can't sit still that long anymore. There's just nothing new for them to find out. So they have to go find new information, because that's their main pull. Visually, they really enjoy a clever aesthetic. So as compared to Taurus, where it was very much about the materials and the physicalness of the visual that you're experiencing or their environments around them, with Gemini, it's more about things being kind of quirky and cool, which is common with air elements, where they like to have a weird angle to how they're decorating or designing things in their creative expression and experience. Other challenges for this sign is that they can be a little too open sometimes, too quick. So what we call like the verbal diarrhea can be a challenge for this sign, where they overshare. And sometimes people feel like they're much closer with them than they actually are, just because this person is opening up to them so much. Some shadow practices for this sign would be grounding exercises, which are super important to keep this person in the body and allow them to actually experience what's going on instead of just thinking about it. So lots of pressing down into the earth, lots of feeling what's going on in the body. Breathing exercises would really help this person stay grounded. And as well, journaling about feelings can help them get a clearer picture of what they're actually feeling if there's that disconnect between their mind and their body. For our birth chart, we're looking at Adele's birth chart, who I'm sure people know is the famous singer. So for her, just reading through some interviews of hers, she was married but became divorced, and she said she wasn't miserable in her marriage, but she just felt like she was plodding along, like she was supposed to get married, and then kind of the boredom of the experience kicked in, which is really common with this Gemini Venus sign needing to have new stimulation and change up all the time. As well, just the fact that she's such a good writer of music speaks to her Venus in Gemini, because they're very good with words and they're very good at expressing themselves. So that really played in there. And another interesting little fact about her chart is she has Uranus and Saturn both in her 7th house, and the 7th house is the house of relationships, as well as Neptune. So these are 3 of the slower moving planets in her chart, but they can be very powerful. And Uranus will cause a lot of need for quick change and needing a lot of stimulation, as well having Saturn there, which is kind of like your sort of grandpa sign, it's kind of like your grandpa planet. It can be restricting, it can be slow, it can be limiting. It can teach you a lot of lessons too, though, but having that in your 7th house makes it not that unusual that she might have found relationships restricting for her. And Neptune is the planet of dreaminess and idealism. So it's probably not uncommon for her to fall in love with people and not really have a clear picture of them until maybe later on, or even a clear picture of what she wants in the relationship until it's too late. So interesting how those planets kind of play into her birth chart and her experience with her past marriage. Then we're at Venus in Cancer, and this sign really loves familiarity or nostalgia. It likes to feel comfortable in its own skin. So when we're looking at Venus, which is a connecting energy, and we put it into Cancer, which is cardinal water, so we're looking at starting with emotions. We have someone who really likes to interact and connect with people emotionally, but the challenge is, in the present day world, we're not really taught how to access or express our emotions. So especially with this sign, sometimes they can feel a little unsure about what they're feeling or overwhelmed by what they're feeling. And since it's cardinal, which has that sort of starting energy, it can kind of put them all over the place, where one moment they're having this emotion and the next moment they're having that emotion. So that can be challenging with connecting with people. But the real gift for these people is that they understand other people's emotions and inner experiences really well, which obviously, if you're in a relationship, is a nice thing to have. Other things about them: Cancer is ruled by the moon, and moon generally represents mother. So what's interesting for these people is the way they connect with people can be a sort of spectrum of somewhere between acting like a child and acting like a mother. That's really natural. Even if it's a man, they can be very caring and mothering and like to look after people's needs. That can be satisfying for them. But because people with Cancer energy can swing between these 2 extremes of being both childish and sort of more adult, it's not uncommon, if they're frustrated or having difficulty accessing their emotions, to kind of fall into a childish state. We also often talk about how Cancer has a bit of a shell, as Cancer the crab. So it's natural for these people to guard themselves and try to protect themselves from feeling exposed. So that's part of that, needing to feel familiar or comfortable. If they're in a situation where they feel like they're at home, where they're supposed to be in their lives, then it's much easier for them to be open and to let down their guard and interact with people in a way that's deeper and more in touch with their feelings. Venus and Cancer people really need to work on their ability to access their emotions, and they need to do that through their body. So they're going to enjoy getting in touch with their emotions through physical expression, whether it's some form of dance or general movement that lets them move deeper into the body, things like yoga or Tai Chi, where they allow themselves to focus completely on the flow and move however their body or emotions are telling them to move. That's one of the ways their emotional energy can get a little more flow. As well, looking at any codependency issues, just because the kind of energy this sign carries, sometimes it can get a little too attached to having people in their lives. So it's good to practice alone time and listening to their own needs. And that'll help with their natural intuition becoming louder, so that when they're trying to make decisions in life, they're making decisions based on what they really want, and they know what they think themselves without getting caught up in everyone else's thoughts. For our birth chart, we are looking at Angelina Jolie. She has Venus right on the ascendant there, so that's going to increase her need to feel connection with other people. And I don't know if I can think of anyone who's a better Venus Cancer figure than Angelina Jolie, with all the children she has taken in and had herself. She has 6 children. I believe 3 of them are adopted from all over the world. And she has spoken in the past about how she met these children when she was doing her filming and just couldn't leave them and had to take them home and care for them. So really showing off that Venus love mother energy that kind of shows through with this sign. So that became a big focus of her life, expressing the love energy through her mothering. And it's important to notice in her chart as well that she has Sun opposite Neptune. The Sun can represent multiple things. One of the things it represents in your life is your goals or purpose. It can also represent your ego, and it can also represent your father. Although unlike the moon, which always represents mother, the sun representing the father is not always true. Sometimes it'll be Saturn, sometimes it'll be Mars. It really depends on the type of father that you had. But what's interesting with her chart, having the Neptune opposite her sun, is Neptune is sort of a dissolving energy or a sort of foggy, hard to perceive energy. And having it opposite to your sun speaks to someone who had difficulty creating a connection with her father and may have felt like he didn't really exist. And that's something that she's spoken about in the past. She's had a fluctuating relationship with her father where he wasn't really part of her life for a while. As well, it's not that uncommon for people with Neptune opposite sun to have some addiction issues. And I know that Angelina Jolie has spoke about how she had to get over an addiction to cocaine and heroin. So just showing how the same two planets together can signify a number of different things. With Venus and Leo, we have a really over-the-top energy. Leo is a fire sign again, so that you have that expressiveness, but now it's a fixed sign, so it gives it a little more staying power. And as well, Leo is ruled by the sun. Leo is actually the only sign that's ruled by the sun, and it takes on sort of a fatherly or kingly nature, similar to when we were talking about Cancer, which is the mother sign. With Leo, we have that spectrum of people moving between being very childish and self-centered into more of a fathering energy, which can be, as we talked about with masculine energy, more focused on the outer world, more focused on image and purpose in the outer world. So with the Venus in this sign, relationships are very important for these people, but on top of them being important, the image of the relationship is really important. Sometimes the actual relationship will go on much longer than it actually should, simply because the person with the Venus in Leo wants to carry on that image of being in this big, important romantic relationship. So sometimes the image supersedes the actual relationship itself. The nice thing about these people is when they are in love, they love to show it with grand gestures and really put themselves out there and express themselves creatively, especially with that fire energy. There's that creative aspect to them. So they'll put a lot of energy into making their relationships with other people feel over the top. But related to that fire energy, because it's less of a connective energy, sometimes they have a hard time reading the room and knowing how people want love to be expressed. So they might be doing these over the top things, but they might kind of feel a little bit like they're not that personal, if that makes sense. Obviously, in this situation, it's really beneficial if these people move out of this self-focused, self-centered nature and start becoming a little more aware of people they're caring about and being a little more empathetic and worldly in their way of caring. Most people do experience Venus and Leo, though, as very warm and bright. So having them around you can feel really enjoyable for the person that is experiencing these Venus Leo people. They're very good at encouraging people to move towards their higher purpose, which can feel really beneficial to be in a relationship with someone who is pushing you in that direction. Sun and Venus energy together means that people's fashion choices, when you have Venus and Leo, is going to be very much about owning the finer things, showing off your taste, high quality items. That'll be natural for them to gravitate towards. Just sort of a regalness in their fashion and in their home, having that environment that just feels a little bit above everyone else's. So you can see there's sort of that ego situation going on, which is something they obviously need to become aware of so it doesn't overwhelm everything. Because their ego is a little bit involved in their relationships, they don't take any sort of criticism very well. They tend to need to feel like they're doing well all the time. So people who are in relationships with them will need to think about how they express issues carefully, simply because it can throw them into that temper tantrum, childish nature a little bit if you blindside them or bring them down as far as their pride goes. So for shadow work for these people, obviously fears of not being good enough are going to come up. That's the underlying reason that they need to feel better than everyone, is just self-doubt, even if they're not aware of it. So moving towards that self-doubt and experiencing these buried emotions, practicing with statements like, I'm not good enough, and then seeing what comes up with that, or no one will ever think I'm good enough. Just trying to find the emotions that are buried under that are causing a sort of arrogance will help clear up some of that stuck energy there. Just in general, anytime they become more in touch with their own emotions, they're going to build more empathy, because they're so far away from the water signs as far as their energetic qualities. They really need to start moving into that, experiencing their emotions, journaling their emotions, understanding them better, and then trying to recognize them in other people as well, so that they're creating some empathetic link between people and not just living in their own minds about whether they're good enough or not. For our birth chart, we are looking at Dita Von Tess, who is known as a burlesque performer. She's kind of just a famous personality. She's done a number of things in her life, but essentially she's a performer, and one that's associated with bringing back burlesque into the current mainstream. If you've ever seen her dress, she always dresses essentially to the nines. She's always got perfect clothing, perfect hair. Everything is to a certain level of wealth where she just looks rich in the way that she dresses. She would never just throw on an old sweatshirt and show up somewhere. She never leaves the house without looking absolutely flawless. And she's spoken about that being a big focus in her life. She actually did speak about it in the past, how when she was younger, her mom gave her like a plain bra and some cheap pantyhose, and she felt so disappointed that she wasn't getting to have like the finer things that she had envisioned herself in. As well, she has a sextile from Saturn to the Venus, so that's going to flavor her Venus. And Saturn's kind of like the old-fashioned, I say the old man or the old woman, but it's more of that traditional energy. And it's working well here with her Venus, but that's part of the reason that she loves old-fashioned things, and part of the reason that she kind of worships the old movie styles and the old burlesque styles and brings them back into fashion with her Venus in Leo. As well, she has spoken about the fact that she will never change her style. So she's always got a classic signature style of black hair, white skin, red lips, and the painted eye. And she has spoken clearly about saying this is her brand and she's never going to change it, which is another sign of the Saturn mixing with Venus, where Saturn can be kind of like the staying power or the sticking power, where things don't really want to move out of that energy. So she's settled into this groove with her style, and she's not going to change it. Venus in Virgo is your analytical love. We have a mutable sign here, so energy can be a bit all over the place. It's an earth sign, so there's a focus on the material things or the earthly realm. And it's also a sign that's ruled by Mercury. So there's going to be a balance with the earthly realm and a thinking element, because Mercury rules the mind. And it also gives a little more all over the place energy or a little bit of pickiness. We always say Mercury and Jupiter are opposites in that Jupiter is a very big picture way of thinking, but Mercury is all about the little tiny details. That really plays into this sign. They're literally known as the lovers of analysis, self-criticism, and self-consciousness, because they're so focused on details in relationships. They can be super critical of themselves and of others, and there's a feeling of constant judgment if they aren't aware that they're doing that. If they work on that, then it becomes more of a giving nature for them. So that's kind of the balance with the Virgo Venus. You're going to have people that are either hypercritical, hyper-perfectionists, and then moving along the scale to people who are very giving and helpful and caring, because that's another side effect. Virgo's also known as the helper sign, where they really enjoy to put themselves out there to care for other people and show their sort of altruistic nature in the world. So going back, just with that earth element, these people can be sensual if they're able to relax that sort of perfectionist energy. So they do enjoy the material realm if they're able to let go some of that need for everything to be a very specific way. For them, having the Mercury ruled sign with their Venus, communication and friendship is really important. So they're going to want to be on the same level with the people that they're surrounded by or connecting with. So similar to the Gemini, which is also ruled by Mercury, the communication matters is really important. They want to feel like they intelligently connect with people in order to feel bonded with them. But because there's the earth element, it's a little more grounded and a little bit less all over the place like it is with Gemini. It has a little more staying power. They can be very matter of fact. They can be very moderate. Sometimes they're called passive or introverted. So their relationships are not going to be like the Leo relationship where it's super showy, it's super above board. They're much more focused on caring for people by taking care of the day-to-day things of life and little details. And they've actually had people say that have this sign that they are often motivated to show affection due to guilt or pity. So just that general sense that they're so focused on caring for people and the details of what's going on that if somebody's suffering, they feel more compelled to care for them. That being said, if you're in a relationship with one of these people and they're accepting of you, it can really help them relax and start to move towards a deeper connection with you. But it can be hard, some people find, to get past all their perfectionism and their tests that they have, all these little details they want you to pass before they accept you. They do enjoy a really clean aesthetic, so they're going to want people that are paying attention to their own detail in their dress and their style at home. They're not the kind of person who likes sloppiness or people who just kind of throw themselves together. They want to see people actually paying attention to details. Shadow work for this sign involve letting go of the details and the judgment. So usually moving into a meditative state where you're thinking less or moving out of your thinking will help you get a little less attached to all the little picky things that it can be easy to get lost in. Relaxation exercises are really important for these people because they can be so wound up with the Mercury energy. So any sort of practice breathing, meditative walking, or slow movement and just really moving into the body to get out of the head can help them feel more connected with that earth element that they have with this Venus in an earth sign. We look at Guillermo de Toro's birth chart, and he's someone who really exemplifies this Venus in Virgo energy with his attention to detail. He often speaks about how long it takes him to get movies made because he likes to sketch out all the details of the visuals before he even makes them. And that really takes up a lot of time. Like, it can take him years to make movies because he spends so much time just trying to perfect how he wants them to look before he even start, which is very key with that Venus Virgo energy where they're working so hard to get things a very specific way that sometimes it can slow them down or stop them from ever getting to where they're trying to go. Another sign of his Venus in Virgo is his humanitarian work. So he puts a huge focus on the issues with immigrants and not being able to do work and the discrimination that they faced in the United States. He's made speeches about it before, and he's put aside a charity fund for people from his own country who want to move into filmmaking and trying to make it more accessible to them and just helping immigrants that come into the United States make a name for themselves and raise awareness about the limitations due to the racism that happens. And the one other thing to say is that he's got his Venus moving into conjunction with Uranus and Pluto. And Uranus has that energy that's kind of a little bit chaotic, a little bit all over the place, very energized, and it can be very new and open to thinking about things in a different way. And he also has Pluto. Another god that is connected with Pluto, or is the different version of Pluto, is Hades, so the god of the underworld. And it's very common with this energy for things to kind of go dark, be transformative, to be heavy, to take things down to the bottom level. And when you think of the kind of movies he's made, when you have Venus coming into a conjunction with Pluto, it does speak to the sort of gothic, heavier nature of his movies and the fact that they often are talking about really heavy topics like discrimination, racism. So he really doesn't pull the punches when he creates these movies. And I think that's related to his Venus being conjunct these two powerful planets. Now we have Venus entering Libra, and this is a good place for it because Venus rules Libra itself. It's a cardinal sign, so good for starting things, and it's also an air sign. So there's going to be that mental, social component. People with Venus in Libra tend to be very aware of the physical quality of things. They like to see things being very balanced and well planned out. There's almost like an architectural preference with Venus in Libra for their visual artistic expression. So these people tend to have a natural artistic ability or awareness of the beauty and natural harmony of things that plays into this position for Venus. There is also a focus on one-on-one relationships because the symbol is the scales, and it's also the opposite of Aries, which is a very self-focused outward movement. This is more of a female inner-focused, balanced kind of energy where the people with Venus and Libra are going to be worried about other people's needs and wants as well as their own, but sometimes they can get overshadowed by other people's needs and wants. So there's a certain level of codependency issues with this, or self-sacrificing with this sign, that can prevent people from having healthy relationships simply because they're just giving up too much to try to make people happy. As well, there's a deep focus on injustices. This sign is often kind of like the judge or lawyer sign, in the sense that they want to see things fair in the world and they want things to be well balanced for all of society. So kind of a big focus there. But when it comes down to their closer relationship, they're going to enjoy people that bring them tranquility, peace, and harmony. And they're going to avoid people that lead to a lot of messy situations or a lot of drama. They prefer things to flow naturally and kind of have a natural cleanness to them. As well, they can be very traditional and like to play the roles that would be considered traditional, as in a wife role and a husband role, marriage role. Things that societally are considered very normal and acceptable are things that they gravitate towards. They can be a little bit of an incurable romantic related to this, because obviously when you start thinking about traditional roles, there is a bit of a romantic story built up around that, maybe more than actually exists. And they can get a little bit caught up in the thought of that, and also the thought of initiating those kinds of things. Because they're a cardinal sign, they have a mental capacity to always be trying to start these perfect relationships that they're sort of focused on in a way that's probably not completely in touch with what's actually happening. It's good to know that these people don't handle rejection very well. They prefer honesty and sincerity, but they take other people's opinions very personally. And if anyone accuses them of doing something that they haven't done, or is unfairly accusing them of anything, they become highly offended about that as well. So they really like things to be open, honest, and above board. Because this is an air sign, there's not going to be a lot of emotional connection with people. They prefer the intellectual connection with people. They might not have a great interaction with their own emotions, and they like to connect on a mental level. That's their focus, is that air element. For their shadow work, because they have this sort of balanced energy where they're so focused on the other person compared to themselves, they're going to want to deal with codependency issues and start working on becoming aware of their own needs, similar to Cancer Venus, where they don't want to give too much of themselves away, or they're going to end up in situations that aren't healthy. So just practicing being alone and seeing what kind of things they actually want in life will help them have a better focus in relationships on what they actually need. As well, focusing less on outer beauty and more on inner beauty in things, which often requires a certain moving out of the mind and being in the body and just experiencing life as it comes up, can really help these people, because sometimes they can be a little bit vain or a little bit too focused on the visual element. And if they're able to experience sort of the innate beauty in all things, they're going to enjoy life more, because they're going to have less of that fear about beauty fading or things not lasting forever. For our birth chart, we are looking at Pablo Picasso's, and interesting thing about him is he was absolutely obsessed with symmetry and form. Before he moved into his Cubist period, which was kind of more his popular period that people are familiar with, he actually has notebooks and drawings that are just women. He was obsessed with the balanced look of a female form, the lines and the curves. It kind of took over his whole life. He was actually obsessed with that feminine energy, which isn't that unusual for people who have a Venus in a Venus sign, where the feminine energy will have more of a dominance than you would if you had a different sign for your Venus. As well, you can tell he had that obsession with things being kind of perfect or looking a certain way, because he didn't like to sign the front of his paintings because he felt like it ruined the composition. So that just speaks to maybe a difference, like if you have a Venus in Leo where you want people to worship you a little bit. Here, he was so focused on the aesthetic that he would rather not have his name be on the front of his own paintings because he didn't want to mess it up. As well, he has a 10th house stellium in Taurus. And Taurus is the other sign that's ruled by Venus. And we know that his Venus works really well because it's in one of its own signs. So that's going to lead to him having more success in the world, because the 10th house rules the outer world and how people perceive you. So that just gave him the advantage of people perceiving him positively. And that really played out well for him, because he's one of the few artists of that era that was famous before they were dead, which sounds weird, but a lot of times artists don't really get name recognition until after the fact. But he actually ended up with about $100 million, which with inflation would be about $1 billion today. So a billionaire artist back in the day is pretty impressive. When we get to Scorpio, I always think of this kind of as your detective sign. When Venus is in there, it shouldn't do that well because it's a Mars-ruled sign and it's opposite of Taurus, which is Venus's natural sign. So usually that would make Venus have difficulty. But because Scorpio is such a deeply connected sign, it actually does pretty well here. The challenge for Venus in Scorpio is that it wants to know absolutely everything about who it's dealing with and everything in its life. It doesn't like to feel out of control. So it has such a deep need for knowing every little detail on the deepest level that some people can find that pretty intense. The other challenge is people with Venus in this sign can be very protective of themselves, and they can kind of fall in between wanting to be deeply, deeply connected with people and not wanting to ever be vulnerable in any sort of way with other people. So that's a really big challenge for them to try to find that middle ground where they can express themselves and be vulnerable enough to actually connect while being able to move past that sort of fear that someone might use information against them. So this sign is kind of the extreme sign for Venus. On the plus side, they're very emotionally committed and extremely loyal. They can be really protective, which is that Mars working with the Venus. So people that they care about, they will essentially do anything for. They can find their feelings very consuming. So sometimes it's a little hard for them to pick who they're willing to get into that with. Because this is a fixed sign and a water sign, the emotions are very powerful and they also don't change easily. They kind of have that deep staying power with their emotions. And when they do find people that they trust, their connection is what we call transformative. Like they really like to help people become a better version of themselves with that connection. If you ever meet someone with this placement, they naturally have a strong sort of magnetism about them. They can often seem kind of dark. I use the word emo a lot to describe Scorpio, whether it's intentional or not. That's kind of the attractiveness of them, is that sort of mysterious dark energy around them. The other thing to remember for these people is that if they don't keep in check their feelings of needing to know everything, control everything, they can get a little bit paranoid. So it's really important for them to become aware of when they are overstepping their need to know everything, because obviously you can never know everyone. Shadow work for these people is definitely processing those emotions. So because it's a fixed water sign, so those emotions kind of can have that real strong staying power. If you're not doing activities to experience the emotions fully and allow them to move through you, then they get kind of stuck and they can pile up. People who aren't in touch with that energy but have the Venus in Scorpio can end up with like a pile up of emotions that will increase their paranoia and their fear of being vulnerable, because they're afraid that if they express themselves, just everything will come out of them all at once and it can be overwhelming. So it's really important for them to regularly do emotional work where they're trying to connect those. Journaling, that kind of stuff can also help, just to get a better perspective on what they're feeling and allow that to move more freely. And obviously any fears they have behind losing control or jealousy, they need to work on feeling those fears and experiencing them fully and working out what underlies them so that those don't become completely controlling in their lives. For our birth chart for this, we're looking at Winona Ryder, who more recently is known for her role in Stranger Things, but obviously came up in the 80s and 90s making movies that were very popular even back then. So Beetlejuice, The Heathers, there's other ones I'm not thinking of right now, Reality Bites, movies like that. She was kind of like one of the dark 80s, 90s girls for the movies she was putting out, which plays into that Scorpio Venus thing. It's actually interesting because she's naturally a blonde and she's always dyed her hair dark, and it plays into the roles that she's done. Oh, Edward Scissorhands as well. She's kind of a muse for Tim Burton for a while, and very much in that dark kind of emo-y look that just suits the Venus in Scorpio energy. As well, you can tell that she definitely had that magnetism. She has exes that have tattooed her name on themselves, and she also didn't want to become too vulnerable because she's never allowed herself to get married before. An interesting other fact about her chart is she has Jupiter on the ascendant. Jupiter is a very lucky planet, and people who have it near an ascendant or in the midheaven often appear very magnanimous and can be very giving and kind and uplifting for other people. I mean, there's so many stories about the stuff she's done. She heard about a victim that was kidnapped in her hometown and donated tons of money to try to help in this girl's rescue. She's helped get actresses and actors that she's working with before, if they got fired, she would help to get them rehired so that they wouldn't lose their job. She set her own assistant up with Christian Bale, and they're married. I don't think many people plan to become an assistant for a famous person and have them set them up with another famous person. So clearly she's very much about caring for other people, and she really puts herself out there, and it just shows with this Jupiter ascendant conjunction. Venus in Sagittarius is our first Venus in a Jupiter-ruled sign. So as we were just mentioning with Winona Ryder's chart, Jupiter is a big, magnanimous expansion planet. It's really associated with philosophy and finding hidden truths and the next thing and discovering new things. Always trying to experience new things and new places. When Venus gets into this sign, you're going to find someone who is really attracted to freedom-loving people and open-minded people. They really bring a fun, sort of loving, idealistic energy. And when you're around them, they can be very buoyant and really lift you up with their experiences. Challenge for them is it's a fire sign and it's a mutable sign. So fire signs aren't very in touch with their emotions usually. And mutable signs are also all over the place. These people can come across as emotionally shallow, but it might just be that they don't really have access to their emotional energy. And they also don't really want to be in the moment. They much rather think about the next thing coming because they're so focused on finding the new thing, the next thing, the best thing. Sometimes they don't want to experience what they're experiencing right now. These people really hate when things become routine or boring. They're quick to move on if they hit a moment where things just aren't interesting them anymore. They love surprises and they like to do unexpected things for the people they care about. They obviously do better in relationships with other people that allow for freedom, don't try to limit them in any way. But saying that, they still can be very enthusiastic and affectionate people because they have that Jupiter positive energy and that fire energy. They can seem very passionate and interested in people. With a fire sign, sometimes though, because they don't have that emotional connection, their energy is really positive, but they might not feel like they're really connecting with you on a personal level. It might just feel more like you're caught up in the magnetism of them. They have difficulty being aware of other people's feelings. It's very important to them that the people that they're with share similar philosophies and humor. They don't really want to be connected with people that are going to bring them down in any way. They can get a little bit obsessed with just the pal energy, so they really like their besties and their people that they hang out with. But the minute it starts to feel a little bit committed, they can start getting a little afraid that it's going to take them away from moving forward in life. For the shadow work for these people, because they can have such all over the place fast energy, they really want to ground down. So anything that brings them into the body and gets them to connect more without being up in their heads. Lots of breathing exercises for these people, taking time to slow down and actually be here. Present moment activities, meditation are really going to help them because they're always avoiding this moment. It actually starts to become a sort of fear for them or an avoidance energy instead of just being a joyous energy of exploring the world. It can be avoiding the drudgery of this moment. So they need to practice sitting in that discomfort. That way those emotions won't start to overwhelm them and push them to always be running, because it's better for them to be actively enjoying going out in the world than to be trying to avoid being in the world. For a birth chart, we're looking at C.S. Lewis, who is a well-known writer. Most kids know him from Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but he also wrote many, many books. He was quite prolific. What's interesting with him, because Jupiter has a sort of philosophical, bigger than yourself, always looking for the answers energy, is he has a number of books that had spiritual undertones, a lot of Christianity, and as well as underlying mythologies that he liked to explore, so kind of trying to find the answers in these stories. And at some point he even went through an atheist phase, but then realized that he couldn't not believe in something bigger than himself and became Christian again. Also related to this Venus in Sagittarius energy is he actually thought he would never get married. He said that before, and which is really common with Venus not wanting to settle down in this energy. He didn't end up getting married until he was 58, which is pretty uncommon back in the day. Another interesting thing here is that his moon is conjunct Pluto and Neptune. And as we spoke about earlier, the moon is the sign of the mother, and Pluto can be a very transformative energy, and it can be sort of an underworld energy, and Neptune can be very dissolving. And his mom actually did pass away when he was only 10 years old. Not to say that's always what'll happen with those planets being together, but it does speak to that being a strong correlation as to something possibly big happening or transformational happening with his mother. Venus in Capricorn is a sort of business-like energy to have Venus in. Capricorn is Earth and also cardinal, so it likes starting things in the real world. It does really enjoy having relationships that it can speak positively about or can show off. Because there's sort of a building energy for these people, like they're very goal-orientated, they really like to have a relationship that helps build their image in the outer world. As well, it's a Saturn-ruled sign, and Saturn's very practical. So when you get Venus in a Saturn-ruled sign, things that happen are, it's very common for people to be attracted to other people with authority or power. Sometimes they're attracted to people that are older than themselves, or sometimes they don't get into a relationship until they're much older. That's not that uncommon as well, because Saturn is sort of the old man sign, so it can slow things down or require relationships to carry sort of a mentor-teacher type role where you feel like you're looking up to the person you're in a relationship with. As well, they take relationships very seriously. They have a sense of humor, but it's pretty dry. These aren't people that are usually laughing. They're usually people that are kind of sarcastically witty. They have tons of self-control and self-containment. They don't like to embarrass themselves in public ever. You're not going to get a lot of PDAs with this kind of person. They don't want to ever be seen as less than professional. But having said that, these people are very supportive of the people that they're in relationships with, and they really love to build them up and help them succeed in the world. It's absolutely important to them to be part of a relationship that is achieving things. So again, there's a certain connection to ambition and conservativeness with this sign. The Venus part will make them very attracted to things that look professional, clean cut, classic. Is very common for people with a Venus in Capricorn. Kind of their style will be very professional, businessy. They're not going to be wearing hippie skirts or be super flowy unless they have some other planets or aspects that change that. They prefer commitment. They often won't open up to people until they feel like those people are absolutely committed to the cause of being in a relationship or a friendship or anything with them. They don't like to expose themselves until they feel like they have some sort of contract with the person. Really good thing about this is these people tend to over-deliver in relationships. They're willing to put way more into people than even they might be getting back, which can be a challenge for some people with the Capricorn Venus, where they are willing to put way too much into a person, even if they're not getting anything from it. If they've put a lot of work and effort, these are the sunken cost fallacy people, where they will stay in a relationship far longer than they should simply because they've already put so much work into it. So they might know it's not working and that they don't want to be there, but they'll keep pushing through, which that Saturn energy plays into. They're just so responsible that they don't want to waste effort, and they always want to worry about the bigger picture. On the other hand, if they haven't put a lot of effort in, they can sometimes cut off relationships or interactions with people if they're not playing the role that they feel like they should get filled. So they can be so goal-orientated that they might meet the right person for them and they'll still break up with them simply because they don't fit the image that they're going for or look like they're going to achieve what they want from them. Some shadow work for these people is emotional awareness through journaling. Because they're so goal-orientated, it's good to get a better idea about what they actually think about what's going on instead of being so heavily focused on the outcome in the end. Boundary setting is important for any Saturn-ruled Venus. So sometimes these people can feel trapped or stuck in relationships or in self-expression or in how they connect with people because that Saturn energy can work that way. And the only way to correct that Saturn energy is to set firm boundaries for yourself and have rules about how you're willing to interact with people and what behaviors you're willing to accept. Self-worth work is also really important for these people. They often feel like they have to earn love, and it's important for them to know that what they're bringing to the table so that they don't let other people take advantage of their kindness and their givingness. For the birth chart, we are going to look at Humphrey Bogart, who is a very old actor from the early 20th century. He really had that commanding, confident energy that we associate with a Venus Capricorn. He was often described as acting like the tough guy, but if you knew him really well, a number of his partners explained that he was full of these super deep emotions and could be, seen to cry at certain movies and stuff like that, and could be very gentle and vulnerable. it was only if you knew him a really long time, and it was only if he felt really safe with you that he would let down that sort of businessy, tough guy demeanor and open up and be more expressive of what was hidden underneath. An interesting side part to his chart is that he has Mercury conjunct Uranus and opposite Pluto, and Mercury is your verbal and mental skills. When you get a fast energy planet like Uranus where things are quickly changing and can be a little bit rebellious and all over the place, and then you have the opposition with Pluto, which is that darker, more transformative energy, and you put it with your Mercury, you can end up with someone who is pretty cutting and sharp with what they're willing to say. Humphrey was actually known for being very blunt about what he thought of people and calling it how he saw things. And he could be quite insulting when he would talk about people sometimes, and he would just explain, I'm just telling you how it is, which really fits into these planetary aspects. Venus in Aquarius is now in the other Saturn-ruled sign, which you'd think would make it like Capricorn, but it's actually kind of moving in the other direction. So with Capricorns, there's a very traditional sort of focus or a historical sort of focus where they like to see how society has been doing things and try to build off that. And with Aquarius, it's almost like they're looking at the structures of the future, or the focus is on what's new and what's evolving. So they're still aware of what societal expectations are, but they like to be on the outside looking in. So when you have Venus in this sign, it can make them very attracted towards people who are unique and a little weird, and people who don't usually conform to what's considered the average of society. They like forward thinkers. So Aquarius is an air sign, it's a fixed sign. So they're going to enjoy people who are deep thinkers, who like to challenge norms and evolve the general beliefs of society. What's interesting with this sign is that they really care about people, but that Saturn kind of restricts them from connecting with people on a one-on-one level a little bit. They can be very humanitarian, but maybe a little bit detached in relationships. They also have less access to that emotional energy, which is common with the air signs, where they have difficulty focusing in on what the other person is experiencing. They actually get to the point where they sometimes feel uncomfortable with emotional intensity, and they try to play that off by being non-possessive in relationships, act cool and detached. When they first get into relationships with people, even friendships with other people, they can come across as a little aloof and mysterious. But over the long term, that lack of willingness to build an emotional connection can really kill intimacy. And a lot of times they can act like they're okay with that, to the point that they will just let a relationship go if the other person doesn't want to be in it anymore. They're very open usually to open relationships because they want to really promote that sort of freedom and outward movement. And some of that comes from the fact that they just really feel awkward when they connect with people on a deeper level. Anytime they move out of their mind or that air energy, they have difficulty really kind of getting into the flow of that. So because they keep pulling themselves back to their mind, they almost feel awkward when they're doing things that are be natural in a relationship because they're just thinking about it too much. They usually emanate a sort of star energy because they're so unique and so future focused. When they enter the room, they can kind of have a star energy, which is interesting because they're the opposite sign to Leo, which is the other, star sign, where they're kind of that movie star energy, whereas Aquarius is kind of that quirky, unique energy that makes them stand out. And they're often not aware that their need to be so unique and so individual and always thinking about the differences between themselves and everyone else can start to offend people. Because Saturn rules the sign as well, I feel like there's sometimes a need for control, although they won't tell you that. And their way of controlling things is just keep everything at arm's distance from themselves. So a desire not to open up to people as a way of preventing the loss of control that they like to have. But saying all that, they're still very kind people. It's natural for them to want to care for the people in their lives and want them to do well. They may not be warm and affectionate the way you would see with maybe a water sign or an earth sign, but they tend to be very interested in the well-being of society in general. So some shadow work for these people is definitely moving into the body, doing any sort of activity that connects them with that physical motion and the emotions that are in the body, just so that they have a better comfortableness with experiencing those. And they also need to look at fears of being average or normal. Sometimes they're so driven to be unique and rebellious against what is common that it's actually a drive of a fear of being like everyone else. So just that Leo Aquarius sort of polarity where there's such a need to stand out that sometimes it's not really about who they are so much as defying what everyone else is. With the shadow work of just accepting that it's okay to be average sometimes, to not stand out all the time, and to not always be unique, it can help them be who they really are instead of always focused on avoiding being who they don't want to be. For our birth chart, we're looking at Nicolas Cage. Something that comes to mind, first of all, for him is he's been married 5 times, so just that detached energy that comes with Aquarius. He named his second child Kal-El, which is actually Superman's name. So going for that kind of unique energy, he really loves to be quirky. The rebelliousness of Aquarius comes out from the fact that he's actually related to the Coppola family, which is quite notorious in the movie industry. He's related to Francis Ford Coppola, who is the maker of the Godfather movies. Nicolas Cage actually changed his name to be separated from them because he didn't want to be connected to that, which is funny because he still went into making movies, but he didn't use that name power to get himself ahead because he had to rebel from, what was the tradition in his family. Something else I really liked about his chart, well, I don't know if he liked it, but I found it interesting. He has a stellium in the second house and also Mars in the second house. And second house is your money house or belongings house. And when you have Mars in the second house, it can lead to overspending or moving too fast with your money. A notorious sort of story about him is he actually ended up burning through $150 million fortune and essentially bankrupting himself, buying ridiculous things, which speaks to his Aquarius energy of needing to be connected to things that are unique and weird, and also his Mars in the second house, where he's just not being responsible and just so focused on possessions and belongings to the point that it kind of does him under. So I love the list of things he has bought. He's bought dinosaur skulls. He's bought 2 Bohemian islands. He's bought lots of exotic cars and motorcycles and a yacht. He bought a famous haunted house. He's bought shrunken pygmy heads. He has a pyramid tombstone he's purchased, crocodile, a shark, an octopus, obviously a private jet, because how do you get to all your islands? But it just shows that Mars energy can be dangerous, and having a focus on the second house can be a little dangerous because sometimes there's sort of an obsession with possessions. Our last sign is Pisces. Venus here, we're in another Jupiter sign, but this is a water Jupiter sign. So it's still mutable, so the energy can be a little bit all over the place. This gives the Venus a sort of dreamy quality. These people are often very idealistic, very romantic, very big thinkers, to the point that they actually feel more comfortable caring for society as a whole than they might feel in close relationships. And these people can often spend a lot of energy devoted to spiritual practices or healing practices, or even religion, which is common with Jupiter, because they would just rather give themselves completely to other people with that Jupiter expansive nature than they feel comfortable in the one-on-one situations, which are much more self-focused and much more inner-focused. There's a lot of self-pity and a lot of low self-worth with this sign, which I don't know if that's just having a water sign with the mutable energy where it's a little bit too unfocused with their emotions, that they feel all over the place and maybe they can't get in touch with themselves as much. But they really do love caring for other people. And sometimes we speak about sort of the escapist nature of this sign, where they love caring for people so much that they can use it as sort of an addiction. And it can be really unhealthy when they love someone so much that they don't really realize how the person is treating them, or if there's negative effects to the relationship. It can become sort of an escapism. The other side of this sign, because it's Jupiter ruled and that's so expansive and it's mutable and it's so all over the place, is that they sometimes don't even really want to get into a real relationship because it's just too much responsibility and it's going to hold them down, and it limits them from connecting with lots of people. These people naturally are not the best judges of character because of that Jupiter positivity. When they go to connect with people, they can sometimes put rosy glasses on it and not really have a realistic awareness of what people are like. So they need to take time to figure that stuff out, especially if they're going to move into a relationship. And they need to be realizing the idealism and the romantic nature that they have and how that might be affecting the vision that they have of who they're interacting with. As well, they're very artistic. Naturally, they're very good at expressing themselves. And that's the benefit of Jupiter with water, is that it really grows those emotions in a way that is beneficial to society and the people around them. So accessing that sort of expressive nature is really going to help them use that energy in a way that is beneficial instead of negative. And usually when they do connect with people, it feels more spiritual to them. There's more of a deeper soul love that they feel for people than maybe, something with an earth sign where you would be more practical love. For them, it's all encompassing, and it can be overwhelming in some ways. So for these people with their shadow work, they really want to journal, especially if they're in a relationship, so that they're able to more clearly identify any sort of patterns that are happening in the relationship that they may not notice that are actually negative for them. As well, any fears that might be driving them, it's really important for them to become aware of those so that they aren't just doing something to avoid dealing with their own self-shame or self-pity or low self-worth. And this sign is generally prone to addiction, possibly because they're just overwhelmed by all these emotions all over the place. They might try to avoid them. So it's important for them to look at any addictive habits that they have and dig into them to try to experience any buried emotions and fears there that are causing them to motivate their lives and take them away from themselves. For our birth chart, we look at Martin Luther King Jr., who just really epitomizes this selfless nature that comes with the Venus in Pisces. I mean, everyone knows he did infinite amount of work to help African Americans gain equal rights. He actually won a Nobel Peace Prize for his work, and as well, he has a doctorate in theology, which is just the study of spirituality, essentially, and religion, which relates to this Venus focus in a Jupiter sign. An interesting thing on his chart is the sun is on his midheaven, and as we said before, the sun can represent the father in the birth chart. So his midheaven is his outer world focus or his outer world appearance. And here he has his father's symbol right on the midheaven. And he actually went to the exact same university as his father and his grandfather. And he became a pastor just like they both were. So he kind of carried on their tradition with his outer world focus. And the last thing I want to point out is he's got Pluto in the third house of communication, and Pluto can make for very transformative communicators or connectors in their community. And he is probably most well known for his I Have a Dream speech, which was, monumental and is still talked about universally today as this huge moment when he spoke, which speaks to the power of his ability to communicate with people. And that's the end of our journey of Venus through the different signs and looking at the shadow side and the shadow work we need to do as we focus in on how Venus acts in our lives. If you're interested in learning more, make sure you check out the Mars Through the Signs video that's on my website, shadowcraftcult.com, or on YouTube, or the podcast is available under the Shadowcraft Cult podcast. As well, feel free to subscribe or like, and hopefully we'll catch you next time.